Hola familia de XRP. Bueno, acá le dejo la entrevista subtitulada al español. Los dejo tranquilos mirando el video. Es muy interesante.
I'm here at the Miami conference, the PIF. This conference is sponsored by the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia. And I'm talking right now with the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, who's been a friend of this program and a regular on the show. We so appreciate you joining us once again, Brad.
Great to be back, as always.
And of course, here we are at a moment in time after massive volatility, not just for the broader markets, but for crypto in general. So how has that impacted your business that we've seen this drop off in valuations? What are you seeing?
Yeah, the crypto markets definitely kind of ended the year last year with some headwinds, and it started this year in kind of a flat-ish. And I think a lot of eyes are on what is U.S. regulation going to look like, and is it going to get done? For Ripple, at our core, we've been on a tear. Our business has been growing very quickly. We do care deeply about the health of the crypto markets overall, but to some degree, our technology is just a piece of our technology. And so we made two big acquisitions last year, both for over $1 billion, and both of those have really overperformed our expectations. A company we bought now called Ripple Treasury, which is a treasury management platform. Think of it as a dashboard for CFOs, the ability to manage liquidity around the world. That is way ahead of our forecasts for both the end of last year, but also even Q1. We're going to have a record quarter. And then we bought a prime brokerage business, the largest non-bank prime brokerage business. It was called His Road, now called Ripple Prime. They also have tripled their revenue run rate since we announced that acquisition. So super happy with both of those. But all of that is in service of how do we make XRP as a digital asset more useful, more trusted, with higher utility. That is our North Star of how we think about the world.
Let me go back to some of those acquisitions, because you are expanding your business with all of these different revenue lines right now and giving you this moat. This is important to investors. Tell us about the how CFOs are reacting to Treasury, Ripple Treasury, and also in terms of prime brokerage. I mean, this gets you in a completely new business.
Yeah, for sure. So, Maria, I think it is a fascinating time and place, and in part because of what's going on with stablecoins. You have boards of directors and CEOs of companies, whether it's Fortune 500 or Fortune 2000. They're asking their treasurers, they're asking their CFOs, saying, hey, what are we doing with stablecoins? Last year, G Treasury, the company we bought, now Ripple Treasury, they orchestrated $13 trillion of payments. 0% of those were through a stablecoin or crypto. That's the opportunity. And as we slowly integrate the ability from those dashboards, say you're making a payment to the Philippine peso, you could send it through the traditional rail. It'll take 3 to 5 days. It'll cost this much. Or you can send it, it'll be there 1 minute. And giving the treasurer and the CFO that option is really, I think, the unlock. And again, we're seeing a ton of interest. And it's partly because people are more aware of what's going on in stablecoins in general. You had $33 trillion of stablecoin trades last year. It's, this is kind of, as a Citibank analyst called it, it's the ChatGPT moment of crypto, is that people are seeing stablecoins as the kind of the entry point into other blockchain-based and crypto solutions.
Absolutely. And it's also enabling so much transaction for individuals and businesses across the world, which we had not seen before.
For sure. I mean, people sometimes don't fully, I think, understand is the unlock for that small business that has contractors around the world or wants to work with a consultant, and being able to facilitate cross-border commerce and a low friction. We have called it Ripple from the beginning of time. We need to enable an internet of value. The internet allows us to move information around anytime, any place, but value still. I mean, you may have seen just last week, PayPal announced you can finally, after 13 years, you can finally move money from Venmo to PayPal. They own both. But before you had to go through a bank to get back in, the interoperability between payment networks is happening, and it's going to unlock a lot of opportunity and really financial success for a lot of companies.
That's the key, and that is a great example. After 13 years, we finally actually see this happening. Now, look, we've got to also talk about policy, because policy has enabled this. And we saw last week the Securities and Exchange Commission and the CFTC say, look, we are coming up with a specific framework and identifying what's a security, what's a commodity. How important was that?
Maria, I can't overstate. That was a massive step forward. And I partly say that with the backdrop of In the industry, we lived through 4 years of a Biden administration that was waging a war on crypto. This never made sense to me. Like, crypto is a digital technology. Like, it's almost like saying we're going to wage war on email. We don't like email, so let's wage war on it. It makes no sense to me.
They waged war on oil as well, right?
Yeah. So they waged this war on crypto, and you had agencies like the SEC who, instead of engaging in thoughtful rulemaking, they just sued. It was lawfare. It wasn't. It just, let's attack these companies and drive them offshore. And so I think it was 9 days ago that the SEC and CFTC came together with this joint announcement and made a big step in just acknowledging here are 16 digital assets, which we can concretely say commodity digital assets. That is a huge step forward compared to where we've been. Now, we certainly want to see more. We want to see this codified in law in case there is another, the former chair of the SEC was a guy named Gary Gensler, who I think really did act in bad faith around this. We need
He's very political.
Very political and very much influenced by his ultimate boss, Joe Biden. And so we want to make sure that we can't have another Gary Gensler moment where they try to, weaponize policy in a way that is about politics, not about what's good for the United States.
Which is why we need to see these things codified. We need to have Congress's role here. And that's what we're waiting for right now. We had the Genius Act. That's sort of in the books. We don't want to reopen that, by the way. I know some people would like to.
Yes.
But then there's the Clarity Act. Tell us how important these two pieces of legislation are and what they do for Ripple and the overall industry.
So the Clarity Act, I was on a show a little over a month ago, and I predicted that we'd see the Clarity Act signed by the end of April. I'm going to say that the likelihood of that has gone down, but I said by the end of May, so give me an extra 30 days, everyone's still at the table. We're still making progress. Ultimately, there's going to have to be a compromise on this key issue around how rewards are managed. And Ripple doesn't actually personally have a dog in that fight. But we think to get the Clarity Act for the industry, for the U.S. to be competitive, to the U.S. to these entrepreneurs not to move offshore, for crypto capital and investment not to move offshore, we need the Clarity Act to get done. I am very optimistic. I was at a dinner 2 days ago in Washington, D.C., sat next to people who are much smarter than I am about how law gets made. I'll say, watching the sausage getting made here has not been pretty, but they gave me more optimism that we are going to get there. And the point that one gentleman said to me is look, when people are at their most frustrated is when you finally get it done because people will compromise.
Yeah.
And from this White House, we're seeing amazing leadership to push this forward. And so I think we're going to get there. It's just taking a little longer than we thought.
So what happens to Ripple once Clarity gets passed?
Well, it won't change Ripple's business too much. What it does is it unlocks the banks in the United States who have been a little bit fearful about, should I lean into this industry? What if there is a future Gary Gensler? And then how am I going to have to unwind things? So if we get that codified into law, it's an unlock for the banks around the world, particularly in the United States. So we have seen banks say to us, look, we understand that you won the lawsuit and you have clarity that XRP is not a security. And last week, obviously, that's another great step forward. But if we get it codified into law, I think you'll see more of the largest financial institutions in the United States and really the world lean in more to this industry.
Tell me more about XRP and what the main use cases are so that our audience understands how it impacts them.
So XRP, much like Bitcoin, is an open source digital asset. There's a blockchain called the XRP Ledger. Ripple, as one of the primary participants in that ecosystem, we really use it primarily around payments. There's some other things we're doing around settlement for the prime brokerage business. But we're seeing entrepreneurs, because XRP is so fast in terms of transactions and so low cost and also energy efficient, you're seeing more and more developers and entrepreneurs build on top of the XRP Ledger. And that's around things like tokenization of real world assets. We're working with Guggenheim at a money market tokenization. The Land Authority of Dubai is doing land registry on the XRP Ledger. There's lots of examples, and it's really how do we take blockchain efficient, highly scalable, very fast and low cost blockchain technologies to enable these settlements technologies that I think are going to continue to rewire financial infrastructure around the globe.
And the acquisitions that you made sort of complement one another in that regard, because you've got Treasury, but that's going to complement what happens in the brokerage.
For sure. I think I've been very happy about how those acquisitions have gone, and I think people see how we're stitching these pieces together. Some in crypto, I think, have done acquisitions that are intra-crypto, inside the echo chamber. we've only done things kind of outside the echo chamber because we think it's really about how do we build those bridges between traditional finance and what we call decentralized finance or crypto. And both G Treasury and Hidden Road, both are just tremendous examples of that. And we're seeing their clients, they want to lean in. And so we're seeing great adoption and excited. I mean, 2026 is going to be a record year for us for sure.
Congratulations on that. That's incredible. When you think about what's going on with traditional financial services, little by little, they're leaning in. It took them a while, but how do you think the competitive landscape changes now that you see the big guys understanding what has been taking place under their noses, but they didn't want to get involved?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see, and I'm sure you've seen those. That's your guests, the people you've interviewed. We went from kind of it's rat poison to it says pet rock to you remember some of these quotes like they're on your show.
Yeah.
And now people are kind of, some of those same leaders are coming around and saying, oh, okay, I see how these technologies. And look, I'll give Larry Fink at BlackRock credit. Like he was one of the first really senior, well-respected leaders to step forward and say, no, I do see real value and real technology value to how these technologies can be applied. So we are seeing a shift from the JP Morgans. We're seeing people start to be more exploratory. Oh, okay, how could we use stable coins? And it's really also driven by customers, right? As I said earlier, the CEOs and boards of directors of companies across the United States are asking their finance organizations, are we using stablecoins? Should we be? Are they more efficient? Because remember, the other unlock around stablecoins is now you can access them and use them 24/7. They don't close at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
Really important point.
Settle a real estate transaction on Saturday. It's a big shift.
Yeah, and stablecoin is real. Blockchain is real. Tokenization as well. Do you see most markets getting tokenized?
For sure. When I started this job at Ripple 11 years ago, I had a lot less gray hair. And, it's finally we're seeing the unlock where people are. Now, the only thing I'll say about just the tokenization topic, sometimes I hear people talk about tokenization like, well, we can tokenize that. And I think we have to ask ourselves, does it improve something? Does it make it faster? Does it make it better in some ways? Tokenization just for the sake of tokenization doesn't really make sense. Silicon Valley has a reputation sometimes of having a technology in search of a problem versus a problem in search of a technology. And so tokenization, I think, has very valuable applications, but there's some examples that I see that I'm like, I don't quite get it.
All right, Brad, you've had a record year. Things are going incredibly well, and we see that growth. What does the year ahead look like? Tell us where the growth at Ripple comes from in the coming 1 to 3 years.
Yeah. The biggest thing for us in 2026 is really just, we made 2 big acquisitions last year. We increased our headcount by 50%. Integrate. Let's make sure that we digest some of that, especially just run. Look, our industry is a very dynamic space. We will certainly continue to look at investments. We've invested over $1 billion in the last year in other projects, and we'll continue to look at playing offense in certain ways. But for our internal execution, it's going to be really about making sure that Ripple Prime starts to take advantage of the opportunities we have with Ripple's balance sheet brought to bear in the prime brokerage business. And again, the Ripple Treasury, really the corporate demand here is growing incredibly quickly. And we want to make sure that we are doing that in a really good way, that they're very happy with Ripple Treasury's business.
So does the growth come from the corporate area? Does the growth come from the prime brokerage?
I mean, I'm going to say yes. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the prime brokerage business, we've already tripled the revenue run rate. That already has happened, and that's really because we have a much bigger balance sheet. There's a lot more we can do with counterparties to some of the largest financial institutions out there. Didn't really want to work with Hidden Road as a smaller player, but now as Ripple Prime, they're like, oh, okay, we trust that as a counterparty, and we do more with them. So that's been a great unlock for us. But again, it's going to be less about another new business for us as opposed to how do we bring those businesses together. And there's a lot of synergies between them. And we haven't quite unlocked all of that yet. So it'll be good.
What a time to be alive.
For sure.
Brad, thank you so much. We'll be watching.
Good to see you.
Come back soon. Brad Garlinghouse here. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Habit. 7 minutes of Tai Chi every morning